Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the fourth session of the Civilian Oversight Webinar Series. We will be having ASL interpretation during this live meeting, and we would also like to note that this meeting will be recorded and available on our website. In this fourth session of the webinar series, we would like to quickly revisit the prior three sessions. In the first webinar session, we discussed the various models of civilian oversight that exist and how they function. In our second session, we had a panel discussion with Cameron McLaney from the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, also known as NACO. And during our third session, we hosted a panel discussion with members of the City of Somerville's Police Department, including our Chief Femino, where we learned about current procedures and processes for filing complaints or an incident report. You can view these past recordings of these sessions on our Civilian Oversight micropage at somervillema.gov/civilian-oversight. So our goal for the session tonight will be to hear from our neighbors in Boston and Cambridge, who currently both have civilian oversight boards. We are going to learn about the formation of the civilian oversight boards and their functionality. This is an awesome opportunity for us to contextualize many of the topics that we have discussed prior to this session and to hear firsthand how civilian oversight entities function in our neighboring cities. Before I introduce our honored guests tonight, I would like to provide a few community norms to help guide our conversation. Please speak your truth and use I statements. Respect everyone's opinions. Listen with an open mind and heart, and expect and accept non-closure. We will do our best to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask questions or share thoughts, and that we are fair in allowing everyone an opportunity to speak and do so. When we open the floor for questions and comments, please use the Q&A feature to ask a question of the panelists, and we will address each question as it comes up or each thought. We'll make sure to monitor these and pose them to our panelists. So tonight we are joined by Stephanie Everett, Esquire, the Executive Director of the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency for the City of Boston, and Mr. Brian Corr, the Executive Director of the Police Review and Advisory Board for the City of Cambridge. We will be having a panel discussion as well as a Q&A session around their respective civilian oversight boards. Stephanie has served as the Executive Director of the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, also known as OPAT, since April of 2021, and she oversees the day-to-day operations of OPAT, in addition to serving as the chair of the OPAT Commission and maintaining oversight of the Civilian Review Board and Internal Affairs Oversight Panel. Dr. Everett works directly with the Mayor's Office, the Boston Police Department, and community partners to implement the series of reforms to policing in the City of Boston. Brian has worked for the City of Cambridge, Massachusetts, as Executive Director of the Police Review and Advisory Board since September of 2010. And as Executive Director of the city's Peace Commission since 2008. On a statewide level, Brian serves on the Board of Directors of Community Resources for Justice, which works to change lives and strengthen communities. He is the immediate past president of the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, again also known as NACO, and having served on NACO's Board of Directors since 2012, lastly, he has served as the treasurer of Massachusetts chapter of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives since 2019. They join us tonight with a wealth of experience and knowledge, and we thank them for their presence and participation this evening. So Please help me welcome Stephanie and Brian. So as a reminder, when we open up for question and answer, please use the Q&A feature to submit questions to the panelists, and we will do our best to field these questions to make sure that all of them are answered. So Stephanie and Brian, I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you want to go first, Brian. I'm just having a little bit of, I'm going to switch over to my laptop. So if you go first, I can, my laptop was just updating. So
I'm happy to go first. It's the magic of technology. We think it's all possible. So, well, first of all, I'm just very honored to be able to be with you tonight. I really appreciate the invitation. As you heard, Brian Kaur, I live and work in the city of Cambridge, and I think the one thing I would say about this work is that it's been such an amazing journey over the last 13 years to be able to work to improve policing in a city where overall, despite certain events over the years, people have a good sense of our police department, and yet people still have negative interactions with the police department. And it's really important for everybody to be able to feel safe and comfortable in our community. So I'm happy to share whatever insights I can tonight from my work here and my work with NACOL around the country. I can keep talking while we're Stephanie to come back, but I think she's coming back.
Thank you, Brian. We are definitely looking forward to having a robust conversation with you and Stephanie. Stephanie?
Hi, so Stephanie Everett, Executive Director of the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency for the City of Boston. I, like Brian, will keep it brief and looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for inviting me in and wanting to learn more about what we're doing here in the City of Boston. And I think you covered what my background is. We are a 2-year-old agency, so we have still some growing pains going on. So I think it's a good time to hear what we have done and what we are looking forward to do. I also lean on Brian. I leaned on Brian on day one. Brian, believe it or not, this week is my 2-year of announcement of me coming in. So I've been bothering you for 2 full years now. I look forward to the conversation and sharing what I've learned so far and where we're headed and where we are presently.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So my first question to both of you is, what type of model, when we did the Civilian Oversight 101, we discussed various models that included hybrid models for civilian oversight boards. And I'm curious to know more about what kind of model does your respective cities have for your civilian oversight entity?
Yeah, well, I can start because I think mine's a little simpler. And in some ways, I'll just frame this by saying that my agency is one of the older agencies in the country, and Stephanie's agency is a successor agency to one that's had been around for a while, but it really is one of the newer ones. So you've got some real diversity, even though we're neighbors to Somerville. So our agency started in 1984, and the model was really, again, it was an early model. So if you look at the ordinance, we're really a hybrid. In the sense that we do have the ability to review complaints. We have the ability to do independent investigations and also to make recommendations about policy. In practice, for most of that 40-year period, the agency has worked more as a review model. Even when it's doing independent investigations, which at this point come up rarely because we lean on the police internal affairs people to do that basic investigatory work. We largely focus on reviewing complaints, but right now, as things are changing in our society, we are engaged in starting with some policy review of the Cambridge Police Department policies. So I can say more about that later, but it really is a hybrid with a focus on review of investigations of complaints and receiving citizen complaints, community complaints, resident complaints.
So Brian, if you could tell us if you can highlight for us the 3 main functions of your Civilian Oversight Board. Mm-hmm. And it's quite fascinating that it's been around since 1984, because I think that for all intents and purposes, when people hear Civilian Oversight Boards, they think that it's a new concept and they don't realize that it's been around for quite a while. So could you tell us what are the 3 main functions? I know you mentioned review.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'd say more broadly, the main functions are to make sure that there is some way for the community to be involved in reviewing police department policies and procedures. And that's through the board and through me as the staff person. We have a 5-member board of residents in Cambridge. Again, I'll say more about that. The core of what we've been doing for many years is to make sure that there is a prompt, impartial, and fair investigation of complaints against individuals who work for the police department. So it doesn't have to just be officers. And it can also include complaints by police officers against other officers. So we have a pretty broad scope about who can make complaints. And then we also work to develop programs and strategies to promote positive police community relations, provide opportunities for expanded discussion, generally improve understanding, and then support making positive progressive changes in the police department, in policing.
Thank you very much. That's super insightful. And it's also interesting that you mentioned it's not just complaints against police officers, and it's not just constituents against police officers. It can actually be a police officer against another officer. So I think those are variations that are seldom heard about. And I think it's super interesting. Stephanie, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your civilian oversight entity and what type of model does it follow?
We actually are 100% a hybrid model, so we do it all. We do all three. So we take in complaints, our initial complaints, and we investigate our own complaints. So we have our own investigators here at OPAT. We also have, and that's been done through the Civilian Review Oversight Board, and then Civilian Review Board. And then we have the Internal Affairs Oversight Panel, which is the audit. So they review the internal affairs division of BPD's file. So you can do a direct appeal. If you do not like the decisions of the Boston Police Department, you can appeal their decisions directly to all the appeals are directly done to our department. The last thing that we can also do is the policy. So we can make policy recommendations in our office. So we do a review of all the policies that are and procedures that are going on within Boston Police Department, and we make recommendations for new or to improve policies that are currently going on within the police department.
What would you say is the typical issues that generally come up for the Civilian Oversight Board to address?
So there are two different ones. So the Civilian Review Board and oversight, they're two different. So oversight is appeals, Civilian Review Board are initial. So there's different ones. So for, I had to write this out. So if you're coming in new, the top three are unprofessionalism, excessive use of force, and civil rights violations. Those are the main ones that come in new. For Internal Affairs Oversight Panel, again, those are appeals. Those are all the ones that are just not sustained or unfounded. So those are the main ones that come in on both sides.
Could you tell us, you mentioned that you have two separate entities that make up the hybrid of the Civilian Oversight Board. Could you tell us what was the...
We also have the OPAC Commission. So the OPAC Commission is made up of myself as the ED and the chair of both the two boards. So the chair of the Civilian Review Board and I call it IOP, so we call it IOP, the Internal Affairs Oversight Panel. So the three of us, we create the regulations for the other two. We set the calendar. That's where the subpoena power is held at as well. Which is always a confusion. I think when we were first announced, it was like, oh, they have subpoena power. And I think they just thought it rested with the Civilian Review Board, but it actually rests with the OPAC Commission, again, which is just 3 members on that.
Okay. And so since we're on it and since we're on the topic of the different powers, what kind of powers do each of, and this goes for you as well, Brian, what kind of powers do each of those entities have when it comes to investigations or disciplinary actions against police officers.
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah, let me go ahead and start. And actually, let me back up only to add that the complaints that we typically get in Cambridge at this point are about rude and discourteous behavior or failure to investigate, which I would say is those are largely cases where someone calls the police and say, you need to do something. And the police will often say, this is actually not something that our community wants us to do, but we get complaints about that. And then we do get complaints about mostly around issues of traffic, bicycles, car crashes, that sort of thing, but where people have an issue with how the crash reporting went because it affects their insurance rate. So, but to the latest question, the main powers are really ultimately, I want to be clear to people, we don't have any direct disciplinary authority or power to impose anything on the police department, but we do make recommendations to the city manager, because we have a city manager form of government in Cambridge, and to the police commissioner, who is our chief, because the commissioner, like in Boston, is outside of civil service. So that's really the official power. And I think the soft power is really the ability to make those recommendations, to be able, for me as the director, to talk with the city manager, the city solicitor, the city's attorney, and the police commissioner about issues we're seeing that go beyond specific complaints or patterns and trends. But I'll stop with that.
Stephanie?
So the police commissioner in the city of Boston is the one, he holds the power for ultimate discipline. What the Civilian Review Board can do is, so how the complaints work, just like Cambridge, a civilian or a Boston Police Department sworn department personnel, sworn or civilian, can make complaints to our office. And the way the process works is that you come into our office, we investigate, we make recommendations, we meaning the OPAT staff, makes recommendations to the board based on the investigation that was completed. The Civilian Review Board reviews the entire file, and then they make a recommendation to the police commissioner for how they believe the case should proceed, whether it's sustained, not sustained, unfounded, insufficient evidence to make a finding. If it's something, and I should say, even before it gets there, I, as the executive director, can dismiss something because it's out of scope, meaning it could be something that happened in Cambridge. And it's like, after we start looking into it, we find out that there was multiple agencies involved. It was Cambridge or it was state police. And so that case can be dismissed, or it's out of scope. It's a matter that cannot be handled in our office. So a matter that cannot be handled in our office, for example, is a criminal matter. Criminal matters cannot be handled in our office. We also do not handle matters that are already pending within the Boston Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. So if you went to the Boston Police and you filed a complaint with them, you cannot then come to our office and file a complaint. And that there's the biggest reason for that is that when the witnesses are involved, and usually not going to talk to multiple people, and you also. But the ultimate reason is that we are the appeal authority. So there is no other appeal authority. So for a BPD, if you are not happy with the decision, you can come to us. You're going to eventually get to us anyway. So it's not like there's no chance of getting to us. We will see it anyway. We also have, through the Internal Affairs Oversight Panel, automatic review of cases. So certain cases like excessive use of force, whether that complainant files an appeal or not, those cases come to that board for review. So even if the case is sustained or not sustained, it still gets to us for us to review, just to make sure that it was a thorough investigation. There is a review of those cases. So if those cases, again, fall outside of the scope, I will dismiss those before they go to the board. When the board looks at a case and they, again, make those recommendations, those decisions are then passed over to the commissioner. It is the commissioner's, by his state statute, how he is that position is. I'm saying he because that's pronoun, and he is, that's where he is at, and it's in the office right now. He is the person who will make the ultimate decision on discipline. We make recommendations only, and so if the commissioner decides not to accept the recommendation of the board, then they have to put in writing why they are not accepting recommendation. But all recommendations are submitted or decisions are submitted to the commissioner.
Is there any kind of appeal if the recommendation is not accepted and the board is adamant that it should be looked at again?
So in our ordinance, it is silent as to how the appeal happens inside of our, if somebody started with us. However, we do have the post commission, so the peace officer standards training or test training. Am I saying that right? So I talked to the director there, the executive director, and was like, you know, you're not barred from going to them with the same complaint. So there are other avenues, as long as you also, that complaint falls into something that they also handle. So there are other avenues that can be looked at, and the Boston Police Department themselves are not barred from having that. Even though you came to us first, you can still file at the Boston Police Department.
Okay.
So just so you know, that there is still, we at OPAC have that rule, but Boston Police Department does not have that rule. And that's because they are, by their own rules and regulations, required to investigate all allegations of misconduct. So if an allegation is brought to them, they do have to look at it. So they can't say, well, OPAC's looking at it, so we can't look at it too. So that's the reason why they cannot say we're not going to look at it as well.
So, and this question is for both of you. How many civilian complaints does your entity receive in an average year?
Well, we're still new. So this year, I believe, so in total, since we started to have operations, so 2022 is when we really started to have the ability to receive cases to present. We've received a total of 142. Those that have actually moved on in the process is around 63, 64-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, and obviously we have a longer history, so I didn't go all the way back, but I did look back to 2010, and it's gone up and down over the years. I know historically, at the beginning of the formation of the board back in the 80s and the 90s, they would often get, the Police Review Advisory Board would often get 15 to 20 complaints a year. And I neglected to mention that the police department can also take complaints. And so you have complaints coming from a couple of sources, but in terms of complaints we receive, it has gone from in the early 2010s to, 5, 6 complaints a year. It started to drift up. And then by 2017, it had started to drop. And we saw a big shift after the arrest of Professor Henry Louis Gates in Cambridge. And I would say he didn't come to our board. He went straight to President Obama. So he never made a complaint to our board. But there were some changes made in Cambridge in policing around procedural justice and legitimacy, which you probably heard about from Cameron from NACOL. And that really reduced the number of complaints because so many of our complaints were around conduct. We actually saw, for no real reason related to Cambridge particularly, a spike in 2018 and 2019. We got 10 complaints each year, which for us was quite an increase. And it was 9 in 2020. My sense is that in the wake of everything that was happening nationally, the Black Lives Matter movement, there was really more focus on people thinking we should make complaints, we should come, and there was more scrutiny. And I think that as things have kind of readjusted, we've gone back down. And so in 2021, it was 3. In 2022, it was 3 complaints. That's rather low, and I'm anticipating we may get more. But so far this year, we've only received 1 complaint. The police department has separately received 1 complaint that I'm aware of. So, because our ordinance mandates that if we get complaints, we have to let them know. If they get complaints, they have to let us know. And as I mentioned, we have an arrangement where they do the initial investigation on our behalf. It's still our complaints. Our board still makes decisions on them. And in fact, just yesterday, I was having my monthly meeting with the people at the Professional Standards Unit at Cambridge Police Department to go over the investigations that they're doing on our behalf, where things are, make sure they're doing things that I think will be important to our board members. And then when it comes to our board in executive session, my hope is always that I've been able to make sure they've addressed any questions. But again, since we have a relatively low number of complaints, we really can take the time to look into them and for the board to deliberate carefully about them.
Brian, you actually lead into the next question that I had for both of you, which is, what is your relationship like? What is the Civilian Oversight Board's relationship like with the police department?
Yeah, so in Cambridge, I would say it had varied over the years. It's never been bad. And I'd say at this point, we have a pretty collegial relationship. We certainly don't always agree on things. We have different ways of looking at issues. But our current police commissioner, Commissioner Christine Elo, was actually the head of professional standards when I came into the role in 2010. So we have a long history of working together initially on dealing with complaints from members of the community. And so that is a strong relationship. And again, we don't always agree, but she really is focused on police transformation, as is our community. So that's been a good relationship. Over the years with people in the professional standards unit, you know, they will always say your mileage may vary. Part of it is, for me, I've had to work very hard to make sure that I have legitimacy with the police department. I mean, it's very parallel to how the police department needs to have legitimacy with the community. And as much as there's some statutory authority, you know, and again, we don't have direct disciplinary power. What I've discovered is that a lot of our ability to get work done is through having a collegial relationship. It doesn't mean that we're best friends or we always agree, but we cooperate and we understand that in the end, we have the same goal, right? We want a community that's safe, that is just, where people feel that they're getting the kind of policing services that they need and deserve, and that people are treated fairly and with dignity. So I've been always able to go back to that in Cambridge. And I would say I also have always had strong support from the city manager and the city council in setting a tone in our community that we believe in oversight. And some people will say, well, you have almost no complaints. Why do you need civilian oversight? But I think part of that legitimacy comes from being able to say that our community wants this. And then the police work for the community as well. So sort of a long answer, but the short version is overall it's good, but it always takes care and attention to make sure that it stays good.
How important would you say it is for the effectiveness of the board and to have those relationships that you've mentioned, both police department, the city council, and other community leaders?
I think it's very helpful. You know, again, from work I've done through NACOL, I mean, I've seen all sorts of communities and different models. And sometimes it's very adversarial, sometimes it's very collegial. A lot of it depends on the history of the community. So it's not a one size fits all. I'd say in Cambridge, because of our community culture, our history of progressivism, you know, much like Somerville, people are never satisfied with what we're doing, and that pushes us. But it also means that those relationships are important because it's very easy for things in the current narrative of our society to be, we are in opposition, you know, we're adversarial. The process is adversarial. And that does happen from time to time, and it's absolutely necessary sometimes. But when we can see that we're working toward the same goal, that's been really helpful. And it's meant that when I do have challenges, when I feel that I'm not getting the information that we need for the board to make its determination, I'm able to talk to people, whether that's the head of professional standards, the police commissioner, or the city manager, and use those relationships to kind of right the ship and get things back on track, to mix a metaphor.
Thank you, Brian. Stephanie, how is the relationship with your entities and the police department, and how important do you think those relationships are to the effectiveness of the work that they're doing?
So our relationships are, you know, still forming. So unlike Brian, like we don't have, they don't have this relationship that has like history. They have history of a city, right? And the history of a police department. So ours is different. I started this work with very clear expectations on both sides. I even tell my staff this, right? Like, so I tell my staff that we can go into a meeting with different entities where we will be sitting at the table and we will be playing musical chairs sometimes, where BPD and I can be on the same side on an issue. And in that same meeting, we can be on the other side of the issue. But what we have to remember is that we're at the table, right? And so as long as we're at the table, we are making progress, because there were times when we wouldn't even come into the same room, forget being at the same table. And with that, I come into these spaces and I ask the board members to do the same thing with one, emptying the bathtub of a term I learned in law school. You empty the bathtub of the knowledge from previous cases and previous experiences that you've had with the Boston Police Department. And I say that because when I was a practicing attorney, my clients wanted that, right? They wanted me, and we want that in our judicial system. We want that with every police department. We want to do the same thing we want of them. When you come across one of us, just because you had an experience with somebody that looks like me, doesn't mean I'm going to act and behave and respond the same way, right? So I asked that the same thing happen, and I asked the same thing of the police, which means that we have to all come into this knowing that, one, all that means is that I don't trust, you don't trust, right? And so let's be honest about this trust thing. We could be truthful and we could be honest. If we're going to be truthful about anything, let's be truthful that trust is not something that is truly given, and that it's not there. I've heard a lot of terms when I was coming in, like, we need to rebuild trust. And I was like, where? It didn't exist before, right? So if trust didn't exist before, I can't rebuild it. I can't ask those who look like me. I can't ask Black and brown people to rebuild something that didn't exist. And I know that we're not a monolith, but the data suggests that that just doesn't happen, right? What I can do is say, can you trust Stephanie? Can you work on trusting me? So if I say I'm going to have a meeting at 6 o'clock, let me be at that meeting at 6 o'clock. And even if I don't have all the information that you asked for, let me have something that you asked for, right? And then let's work on, and let me tell you why I don't have the other things and why we are still working, so that you know that, well, she didn't have it, but like, she showed up. She at least had this. So they may not trust, because OPAT's still a government agency. So it's not just not trusting the police, it's trusting governmental agencies as a whole. And this is what I would think Somerville needs to also understand, is that community may be asking for this, but they're still going to have an opinion about a government agency. So I had a lot of people who were like, are you just a face? Are you just going to be there? Are you this the person who they're doing this for? Right. And what I had to tell people is, one, I would not take a position where I would ever be this for you. Right. I'm never going to just be the pat on the head to satisfy our cries and our marching. That's not what this is about. I'm going to make sure that we have meaningful work, and that there's meaningful efforts, and that your voice is going to be heard in the work that I do. And so I did the work and I'm still doing the work for people to trust me. And then the other things will happen. And then doing the work with the police department to be honest with them and be truthful with them, that I know that you also don't trust us. So it's not just that we don't trust you, it works on both sides. And so when we have these truthful conversations, and we're still doing that work, right? Because the interactions come because there's lack of trust, right? I don't trust that when you move this way, that I am safe as a police officer. And that's why I respond the way I do. And it doesn't mean that I'm talking about excessive force. It may just be the way that I talk to you. And that's why one of our number one complaints is professionalism, right? So there is a way that we have to be honest about and truthful about what we are doing in this space. And the first thing is that trust doesn't exist. And so we just need to do little things. We are in June having to meet the commission, get to know Commissioner Cox, because he's been here since last August. And I keep telling people what I just said to you, but it's like, I want you to get to know me, but I also need you to get to know the commissioner, right? Because they know what BPD does in their minds, but they don't really know who he is. So I need you to get to know who the Commissioner Cox is outside of media, sound bites, and showing up at certain events. But I need you to have this intimate conversation with him, so that you can have these conversations, so you can get to know the commissioner. So people who are involved may know the commissioner. We've had these conversations, and I know what work he is trying to do, and I know what he believes in and why he moves the way he does. But others who are not in that circle, kids, youth, those who are going to be impacted, they need to have those questions answered. They need to feel that safety too when they see him, or see those that represent him. And so we have to do that type of work. in order to move this space forward. And so there's a lot of work I still have to do. So I'm not at Brian's level yet, where it's just like, we're collegial. I think for me, I'm still at, let's start building trust. The police department has been, I have not had an adversarial moment that wasn't overcome, because I think I'm very realistic. I look at the fact that my ordinance came at the same time that the Post Commission came in existence, and it was an overwhelming amount of information for the Boston Police Department to take in and what they need to do at the same time. And I know some people feel like, well, that's their job. If you worked at any organization in two separate entities, regulatory agencies told you to do two different things at the same time, and you have to figure out who do you answer to first, that is a lot for anyone. And so you have to be respectful of that, but at the same time doing your job and making sure that what you need to do is done. So we have been very collegial in that space, and where I needed to be helpful, I have been, but I also, and I'll get into more things on how I look at police misconduct, but I think, we've talked about this, but I think that there is just a lot more that needs to happen in the trust building spaces.
So you mentioned that in order to foster and build positive relationships, it's important to have intentional conversations, intentional interactions, have those difficult conversations. And it's also important to meet people where they are. Do you have any other recommendations on how to build and foster positive relationships with the entities, including the police department and the community that you work closely with as a civilian oversight entity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it kind of builds off of what Stephanie and I have been talking about, that, I, as I said before, I go back to procedural justice and legitimacy. That has to be the touchstone for everything we do. And legitimacy comes from treating people in a way that's procedurally just. And that's everybody, community members, elected officials, people in city government, police officers, and certainly people who are making complaints and concerned members of the community. They all have to really feel and see that we're listening to them, that we respect them, that we may not always agree with them, but we hear their story and we appreciate where they're coming from. And then part of the challenge with this work is that, Stephanie alluded to this, that there's a sense for a lot of people that, like, that's their job, they've got all the power, we need to have power over them instead of them having power over us. And my experience has been that, if you try to approach this as like a fight where we're going to fight you and beat you, sometimes you can win, but more often than not, the old patterns, the old systems come back. And so you have to get to a place where you're not always adversarial, if you're in that place at all. And so part of that, from my perspective, is that, the philosophy behind oversight is different from the philosophy behind policing traditionally, right? You've got a model that comes out of, as we've heard a lot, slavery and slave catching in this country. And it also comes out of this idea from England of the police are the public and the public are the police in the 1820s, or Robert Peel and those principles. And so police tend to hang on that second and not pay as much attention to the first. And then in the last decade, a lot of people who are activists tend to focus on the first and kind of ignore the second. And so I think to have those relationships, you have to be able to kind of acknowledge the complexity of it, right? It's not simple, and it's not just, we're now controlling the police department. Like, how do you see the good and the bad? How do you see the challenges they face? How do you relate to them as human beings? Because I think that ultimately we want police to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And so we also have to do that. And I think that, not to go on too long, but this is true inside oversight, but it's also true within policing. And so part of, conversations that oversight can have with police leadership are about, what are you doing internally? Are you treating your people with procedurally in a procedurally just way? Do you have legitimacy? Do they think you tell them what to do because you're the chief or the captain or the lieutenant? Or do they think that you're giving them things to do, giving them orders because it's what the community wants and needs? And so I think that is a good way to build relationships, to help them see the parallels between what we're asked to do and what they're asked to do, while recognizing they are completely different, and then helping to build that relationship by hopefully infusing some of that philosophy into the police department. right? That we are here to create the kind of community that we all want to live, work, play, go to school, worship in, and that they're part of that community, even though they have a specific job and a specific role, whether they live there or not, they're part of the community. And if we can help them see that they're part of the community, that we're part of the community, that's also a good way to start building those relationships and maintaining, to the extent possible, positive relationships. And that's been a big part of what I've tried to do over the years, in addition to the day-to-day work and the setting up meetings and training board members and reviewing complaints and all of that, is that deeper philosophical work to try to create the kind of public safety environment that we want to have. And in that way, I think that's one of the parts of civilian oversight that is often missed. It's so focused on misconduct and back-end accountability that we don't get as focused on front-end accountability. How do we create the kind of conditions that will give us the public safety that we all want?
Thank you, Brian. Stephanie?
I feel like this is such a long, I feel like Brian stopped, but because it's such a long response, right? Like community responsiveness and our responsiveness also to ourselves. So one, I think so I remember calling Brian and I were having a conversation and I was like venting about something, and like, I feel like I've vented to Brian about a lot. And he had to give me the same conversation, right? Like, what is your role? Remember what you were there for, right? Because it's easy to go off that. So I would say number one is you have to have a Brian in your life or have someone in your life that will remind you what your role is. Because it's easy to go to your ordinance or your whatever created you, the entity that created you, the body statute that created you, and say, okay, this is my job. And then you hear community tell you what your job is, and then you get squeezed in the middle someplace. But it's always great to have someone who will center you and say, okay, but what is your purpose? What is the purpose, and what are you trying to achieve? And are you losing sight of that because of all these other things that are happening? So in all that, I say, give yourself grace. And that's the biggest thing I would say. First of all, before you attack any of this, give yourself grace to know that you are not going to always meet the standard that is being put on you by community, being put on you by elected officials, being put on you by the police departments and the police unions. Just give yourself grace and know that you are doing what you are supposed to be doing. You are enough, and that's why you are in that role. So let's start there. And then for community, what I have found is that, it has been a long time coming for communities like Boston, right? Like, I spent the first part of my time being in this role researching how did this office come about, not just going back to what happened in slavery. I really wanted to know what happened here. And I'm from here, but like, what reports could I get my hands on that talked about the need for us to happen? Because if Cambridge had a Civilian Review Board, you best believe there was an ask for it in Boston, right? So, and there was always an ask for it. And when you ask for something, there's usually a report done. So we had the St. Clair report, and the St. Clair report came out of what happened with Charles Stewart and a massive amount of over-policing, nice word, that was happening in our Black communities because of a false report. And it was horrible, right? But then buried in that, there is, in that report, there were 5 in custody deaths at BPD, right? So there was a lot of reasons for this report, but there was also a call for a Civilian Review Board. And then we had the Community Oversight Ombudsman Program that came out underneath Menino. So the St. Clair Commission report was commissioned by Mayor Flynn. Mayor Menino had the co-op come out. And so that in itself asked for an office that was very much my office, I think in 2005. 2007, from the ED to the Civilian Review Board, the oversight, they asked for the exact office to be created, but it was not created. And then we had Victoria Snellgrove, who unfortunately passed away after a celebration of the Red Sox. And again, called for another oversight. And it wasn't until what happened with George Floyd's murder that this office was finally created, and that was with the creation of the Police Reform Task Force. Now, you'll hear people miscategorize it and say, oh, George Floyd was killed way over there, and now they say we need this office. And it's like, and so I had to like really pull that together and tell people, no. It actually was asked for and recommended when I was in high school, and nobody did anything. So I think sometimes that history helps people calm themselves down, especially on the police department side, and even community members who are against this office, for them to realize like, oh, Flynn commissioned a report. They asked for it. Menino had a board put together and they asked for it. Once they start seeing that there were multiple calls for this office, so it's not me having to fight this fight and say why we needed it. It's like, here's these reports that existed when I was still in high school. This is not me saying it, right? So that's a way of you being able to answer that. But we also, to answer directly what we do, our OPAT commission, again, the two chairs and myself, we are mandated to have community meetings 4 times a year. We end up having multiple meetings more than that. And in the 4 meetings that we do have, they're called community meetings, we report out the data of how many FIOE, so field interaction observations, and I forget what the E is. Don't get me started. What's the E? It's FIOE. Do you know what the E is, Brian? Field?
No, because that's one of the things. Every city has its own terminology
It's,
to get oversight.
So no, it's how the police stop and interact with when they. I think it's a common term. It's when a police officer stops someone. I
guess I think it's like field.
It's the end of the day, so do not judge me on the E. It's on my website. So when they are, that FIOE data is on our, this happens to use acronyms way too much, and you don't spell it out. But that data is reported out. The rest data by zip code is reported out, and age. And from that, my great policy analyst decided that she also wanted to pull out the youth data and start reporting on that, because we start to see that youth were FIOD'd way too much. And it's a way for our community to really go in and look at our data and say, why are our kids being stopped so much? Are there new programs that need to come in? Is it happening in a certain zip code way too much? And if so, is this zip code in need of more services, right? So there's a lot of information that we do give out. So that's how we give out information. Again, we also did like a whole lot of get to know OPAT. So we went to different parts of the city and was like, hey, this is us. This is what happens when you file a complaint. This is our staff. This get to know who we are and get to know how your complaint becomes, gets before the board and how it becomes resolved or not resolved or whatever happens and what we can take and what we can't take. So we try to do a lot of outreach, and this is, again, we're trying to do the one with getting to know Commissioner Cox. So we do a lot of stuff on that end, but then there's also, for me, I've been trying to redefine for people what police misconduct is. It's not just like excessive use of force, but how it impacts you as an individual, your family, our communities, how it impacts our wealth gap, how it impacts our education opportunities, how it impacts our opportunities, period, whether it be job or just opportunities to own homes and all of that stuff, and what I can do at OPAT to correct that. So I've done that with job creations within OPAT. I've done that with creating year-round internships to teach our kids how to do stuff, creating a youth advisory council. So just doing things internally to really correct some of the wrongs that go back further before 1992, right? So we can address it here. So there are things that you can do. And then I will end with just saying, like, my new thing is just telling people we're not in the street marching anymore, but our feet are still moving, right? So there is still work. So that's the way that you can bring community in. We have to just consistently find ways for community to understand that we're not done. There's no marches, but there's still work to be done, whether it's policy, whether it's having youth come in and engage, whether it's you, if you're in college, engaging. There's still much more work to be done, and we need your help to make sure that it's still being completed and that voices are still being heard.
Thank you. I appreciate the wisdom in both your responses. Brian, it looked like you were going to say something.
Well, no, I the same thing. I really appreciate all that, Stephanie. And I also appreciate the kind words. Thank you for that. And then the last thing I would say is, I think what Somerville will find is people engaged in this work as staff or board members. If you're doing your work well, everybody's a little bit mad at you, right? Nobody's totally satisfied with you. And that doesn't mean just because someone's mad, you're doing the right thing, but you will always have people that are disappointed. And I think part of it, just picking up on one of the last things Stephanie said, is that, we're inside the government, right? And so we have a different role than the ACLU, the NAACP, community activists, and hopefully our roles all work together. But there can be frustration because people say, well, you're just covering up the problems in the system, and not everyone will get past that. But it's really important to remember that we all do have different roles, and as Stephanie said so eloquently, this is also part of the work. It's a different part of the work, but we may not be marching in the streets, but we are still marching toward justice.
Thank you. I want to take the first question from our constituents. And that question is, what are the requirements to be a Civilian Oversight Board member? Are they elected? Are they appointed?
Okay, I'll go. So in Cambridge, we have all of our boards and commissions are appointed by the city manager. So in terms of the official appointment, they're not elected. And as of a charter change a couple of years ago now, those appointments are confirmed by the city council. So we have a 5-member board. They all have to be residents of Cambridge. They cannot be current city employees. I think it's the only board or commission at the city where they can't be city employees. They have 5-year terms, which is the longest term. Most of our boards are 3 years, but the idea was to give them longer terms so that there's less potential for political pressure. And other than that, there are not specific requirements about education or background. Like all boards and commissions, they should be as much as you can at 5 people, broadly reflective of the diversity of the city. So we do our best to do this. And we also look at that citywide across boards and commissions. And then we look for people who are fair-minded, can be balanced. We want people who have had different kinds of experiences with the police department. We don't only want people who think the police are great or who think the police are terrible. And we want people who are willing to listen and take in new information. I mean, it's a little bit like being on a jury. Obviously, there's a lot more detail. It's a lot more specific. They need a lot of training. And so that's really how we think about it. We want people who can participate in the work, who can do that community outreach, who can make fair decisions about complaints in the investigation, and who can think creatively about how do we take trends that we see and translate that into policy recommendations for the police department and for the city.
Thank you, Brian.
We're very much similarly situated, minus years. So the Civilian Review Board has 9 members on it, and they serve 3 years. And 3 of them come from recommendations from the city council. So the city council actually submits 9 names to the mayor, and from those 9, the mayor will choose 3, but all 9 members are appointed by the mayor. There is a process that the city council will put out. So there was like an application, I believe, or some forms that the city council put together when we had our big thing going, get on the board last year. So that is a process for the city council. The mayor's process is you send in your resume and interest. But similar, we really do want people to have different backgrounds, everyone has a bias, right? Like one way or the other, but I personally don't have a final say. It's like a whole bunch of people who decide. I do think like you should be able to look at both sides, again, drain the bathtub and be able to have this conversation. We have great board members right now. The Internal Affairs Oversight Panel, they specifically say in the statute that some of the members should have law degrees, and that's because they are reviewing cases that have already, so they're more like the appellate, and so there are attorneys. those conversations are fun for me because I'm an attorney and I'm always like, yes, it's like, and so even when we write summaries for them, I'm teaching my staff how to write in legal terms to like get right to the point. I'm like, we attorneys appreciate this type of writing, but we don't. We also have those who are not attorneys on that panel, so there's no requirement that you be an attorney. You be like, no one's an elected, no one's a law enforcement agent on either one of those panels. There are attorneys on both panels. Actually, the OPAT commission, which is myself as a retired judge, an attorney who's chair of the Civilian Review Board, and I'm an attorney. So imagine our conversations are very, very, very good because there's a judge and two attorneys. So it's fun. But
I would like to be a fly on the wall as a.
Oh, they're publicly noted. Well, I will tell you, the OPAT commission meetings are the only time I get to talk to the chairs because we would violate open meeting law. So my deputy speaks to the two chairs. I never get to talk to them except when we're in a publicly noted meeting. So we have a good time when we're together because I don't get to talk to them except when we're in meetings. It's like I miss them. And I really like the judge. It's Judge Leslie Harris, and I don't get to speak to him unless, and those who know Judge Leslie Harris is a retired judge. He's a great man with great history, great knowledge, and you don't get to hear from him until he's in my presence, which I'm not mad at. I don't get to see him, hear from him in presence, but we like to sometimes call and say something that's, really I need advice on, but you can't talk to him until you see him.
Thank you, Stephanie. The next question we have from a constituent is, what characteristics do you think every civilian oversight entity should have and why? Brian, it seems like it's something just.
Well, no, this is my my NACOL hat in a sense. I don't know if there's a single thing that every single oversight agency should have. I guess what I would say is it should have integrity. It should have devotion to procedural justice and legitimacy. It should have high ethical standards. And so I think for me, it's more, NACOL has a code of ethics that they ask civilian oversight entities to adopt. In fact, my oversight board is in the process of looking at that and considering it as something that they will adopt for our board. But it is, I think those are really the core principles, and everything kind of flows from that. Now, and I think probably what the person asked the question meant was, do they need subpoena power, or do they need independent investigations, or do they need an office outside the police department, or something like that? And a lot of those things are really important. I think it's great if people don't have to go to the police department to make a complaint. Many people are perfectly content to do that. Many people would never do that. I think it's important for subpoena power to be used judiciously if you have it. Many entities don't have it. Often I've heard people from the ACLU demand that oversight is useless without it. My agency has subpoena power, and we haven't used it in decades because we haven't needed to. So I think that in those terms, there isn't anything that's an absolute. I always go back to NACOL's effective practices, those 13 effective practices for civilian oversight, and then looking at those not as a laundry list or the 13 commandments, but a set of things that interact, that based on your community, your history, your model of oversight, your legislative model, the laws of your state or community, it all varies how it's implemented. So very long-winded way of saying there's not one thing other than being really deeply rooted and focused on ethics and ethical behavior in everything that you do.
I don't think it's long-winded. I think it lends itself to what you were saying earlier, that there's complexity in this and that needs to be acknowledged.
I definitely agree with everything that Brian said. I think that for Boston, everything that we have is what Boston needed. I think we need some more things, but I think that the ability to have subpoena power is huge. We have not had to use our subpoena power. But I do think that for me, I think everyone should have the ability to have it. I don't think you should be told no, you can't get something that you really need in order to seek the justice that your organization is created to define. Like, you don't want to be blocked from doing something. But I guess I would question, why would I have to use it, right? Like, if I have to use it, that would raise a whole flag for me. We haven't had to use it. We have a working relationship with the Boston Police Department. We have a liaison. When we request documents, we get our documents. And I think it goes back to what Brian said earlier, is having this collegial relationship where you can get what you're requesting. If you have an adversarial relationship, right? And so my office started with 19 pages, right? So I started with 19 pages. No brick and mortar. It was 19 pages. So I'm in my home now. This was 19 pages in my home. So this is where all my meetings happened. The first time I talked to Brian, I was sitting in the same spot. 19 pages, brick and mortar, did not exist. There was no staff. It was just myself for almost 7 months. And I was answering a lot of questions. There's a lot of political things going on at the same time that I started. And so now I think there's 12 staff. We have 2 interns plus, and that's a full year internship of high school, paid internships. High school interns get paid $18 an hour. College students get paid $22 an hour. These are things that we created along the way that didn't happen. So beforehand, so these all these things that were happening in this. Now I'm in my 3rd budget cycle that we just had a budget breakfast for the other day. But all these things that didn't happen, I literally started with 19 pages. So we didn't have a liaison when I first started for the Boston Police Department. So we're very fragile with our relationship with that. Don't rock that boat, because we didn't have that at first. So you do have to pick your battles on certain things, but we have not had to do that. But I think integrity is key. I also want to say, we have to be we're the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency. We also have to be accountable and transparent, right? So I think that what every office should be is accountable and transparent. And even when you're not going to like what's coming out. You may not like what's coming out. You're going to sometimes you don't like what's coming out, but you have to stand on what's coming out. You have to stand on it, and you have to stand on, and this is again goes back to, because community is not going to understand. I've gotten it where people are like, why haven't you done more? And we just had this conversation, Brian, why haven't you done more since you've been created? And it's those problems existed since before I was born, right? What do you want me to do? I'm doing these things. I had 19 pages, right? And then I have to put this down. This is not about me. People want things to be done because they need it to be done. They need to know that this was not a passive thing that was done just to tell people to be quiet. We did something, move on. And so it's not personal to you. So you have to be just as accountable, right? And you have to hear it. And sometimes when you're hearing it, you have to stand on it. You have to stand on it, and you have to deal with it and know, I'm still going to have because when I was getting yelled at about things, we had community meetings inside up to get to know us. And I'm going to go and I'm going to still have that community meeting. And if you need to yell at me about something, you're going to yell at me, and I'm going to take it, and we're going to have a conversation. And I would always say, if there's something I need to be doing better, that was my ask of the community. It's not always me reporting out. It is for you to tell me, what can I be doing better for you? And that's the thing I would tell you, don't lose sight of. What can you be doing better for them? Because they need to know that they are still being heard. Because even when I say your feet are still moving, it also means that people need to be heard and brought in some way.
And it's interesting that you went into community feedback, because the next constituent question is, what feedback have you received about your civilian oversight boards?
I can continue if you want me to finish that, Brian, or you want to?
Yeah, no, go ahead, and I'll jump on after.
Our complaint is that we haven't had any sustains. That's the complaint. Our number one complaint is that you've had no sustains.
Can you explain to the public what that means, the sustains?
So sustains, I wish I could do my piano one day. So sustains are when means that an allegation has not been held to be true. We haven't said, if I'm saying that, I don't want to say true, that we haven't had enough evidence to say that this incident, the whole this police officer accounted, or like to discipline this police officer for the incident that you brought the complaint for. Is that a better way? I'm trying to say it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump in and do mansplaining, but I guess I think the way I might say
It's
it
not
is
mansplaining. I'm just trying to like come
Yeah.
like the legal in me is trying to like say it in a way, because I don't want to say not guilty, because it's not
right. It's not guilt, right?
Yeah,
I guess I would just add that I think it's just that idea that people have made complaints and you've never found that the officer did anything wrong. Is kind of how I think the average person thinks of it.
but it doesn't. So
It doesn't mean that, but that's how people kind of think about it.
yes,
right?
and so we actually, and that's. But it's more than that, because we may not have found someone, we may not have sustained, but we also may have said there's insufficient evidence to not like give you, there's a host of reasons. The complainant didn't give us enough information about, like, we still investigated as far as we could investigate, but a witness didn't call us back, or the complainant didn't call us back. But we had it, so if you file a perfect example, if we get a complaint and there's enough information in a complaint that we're like, okay, we can move forward even though the complainant's not calling us back, we will try to go as far as we can go, but it may not be enough for us to say that this actually happened or did not happen the way that the complaint came in. And so because of that, it's insufficient. I don't close your case forever. You can come back whenever, because we don't have a statute of limitation. You can come back whenever and say, I'm sorry, I was busy. My life happened. Life happens. Here's all the information you were emailing and calling me about. But I can't keep the case open in my office forever. Like, I have to give it to the Civilian Review Board at some point. And so they make a finding on their own, like, okay, it's insufficient evidence. So they bring it back. Now, I can bring it back before them and say, hey, you heard this case 5 years ago. Here's the case again. And here's all the evidence, and now here's the new recommendation on it. But our complaints are just that they're not sustained. They're just, but I want to go back and say again, and this is not to, again, I'm going to stand on this. People don't know who we are, right? I think in the bubble that exists that are political and those community people who are really involved, they know who OPAT is. So this is why we had to do this whole concerted effort of get to know who we are. Like, it's purposeful. Get to know OPAT. Get to know that there is a third party where you can file complaints. Because when I grew up, I was never told that I can go to the police department and file a complaint. And now I'm telling the world that you can come, telling the city of Boston, you can come, not only you can go to Boston Police Department, you can go to Post, but you can come to this third other government agency and file a police report. And I want them to trust that something's going to happen with that. There are people who have filed complaints with the police department and they didn't go anywhere. So they're reluctant to do it. So now I have to tell them, no, when you file, we here at OPAT, we have our own investigators. We're going to investigate. Boston Police Department's not going to investigate. Because some cases, not to complicate this more, if you file at the Post Commission, some of those cases just get sent from Post Commission right back to the Boston Police Department, and the Boston Police Department's the one who has to investigate. So that's also a thing. So there's all these complexities that make people just say, why am I going to do that? This is what they do. The behavior, the thought is, this is just what they do. So why would I ever complain about it? I spent most of my, even as a mom of Black boys, I taught them how to behave if they are ever stopped by the police. I've never taught my sons or my daughters how to file a complaint if they felt like they were wronged by a police officer. That's never been something I had a conversation about. And so because of that, I'm now asking generations of people who spent their lives telling everyone in their family how to behave if they are stopped by the police, to now, if you are stopped by the police and the interaction makes you feel some kind of way, or if this happens, you actually can go down to the Office of Police Accountability and do this. That is a thinking that is not going to happen overnight. And so when I say you have to stand on it, I have to understand that people aren't just going to, as much as I want them to trust Stephanie, they're not going to just trust me. They're not going to just trust OPAT. And I have to take the hit that, yeah, it's not coming as much as we want. And some of the complaints that are coming in, if we post our complaints online, they're not ones that have risen to the level to be sustained, or the complainant didn't come back for whatever reason. And there's a host of reasons for that, but we have work to do. And I know I still have work to do. And I'm willing to do the work.
Thank you, Stephanie. Brian?
Well, we at least don't have that particular issue, but I think the biggest complaint that we hear about ourselves, as opposed to about the police, is that, well, how come you're not getting more complaints? And I think there's a sense that in a city of 120,000 people with 2 universities, significant population of people of color, people living under the poverty line, and 100,000 calls for service a year, if I didn't already say that there's got to be a lot more complaints than 2 or 3 or even 10. And I am always open to the idea that we can continue to do better outreach and let people know, because along the lines of what Stephanie said, in Cambridge, and I would say every place I know of, we all face this thing where people say they don't know about it. They've never heard there was civilian oversight. They don't know it exists. And even though some form of oversight, some oversight agencies go back, like ours, 40 years, Kansas City goes back to the early 70s, people still don't know. So that's part of why people don't make complaints. But the other part, I think my sense after doing it all these years is that mostly we have a pretty good police department that's doing a pretty good job addressing the needs of a very diverse community. Again, I'm sure there are people who could make complaints that don't. And I certainly talk to people on the phone who they're thinking about making a complaint and they don't. I'll follow up with them and they just don't make a complaint. And even that, though, can be valuable, because sometimes, people, just the idea that there's somebody in government that they can complain to, they don't necessarily want to go through a formal complaint process. I get people that say, look, this wasn't terrible, but I want somebody to know what happened to me and how it made me feel. And they say, well, here's our process. And I would say I never encourage people to file complaints, but I let them know that if you file a complaint, it will be taken seriously. And it is an important form of feedback for the community, for the police department, for the government. So people still often don't. And I would say that I think this is an ongoing challenge throughout civilian oversight. I will say that I'm in a city where people aren't shy about complaining. People complain to me about all sorts of things, about bikes, about cars, about buildings, about the street cleaning, about the leaf blowers, and people certainly complain to our city council, our city manager. So I don't want to say that I think there's no more complaints that we should be doing, because I do think there are more people who should be doing complaints to us. But that is, again, sort of the biggest issue I hear is that, you guys should be getting 50 or 100 complaints, because I know there's lots of bad interaction, but I haven't even had people come to me and say, this happened to my friend, or this happened to my son, or this happened to my neighbor. It's more the abstract. We know what policing is like and what the problems are. So it's an interesting place to be, but I think that's also part of the field of civilian oversight. There's a sense out there of what policing is like and what people's experiences are like. And in many places, those ideas are absolutely right. People have really bad experiences on a regular basis. They don't get the policing services that they need when they need them. They do get over-policed when they don't need to be over-policed. And in places where it's not as severe, there often aren't many complaints. And that's, I don't want to talk in circles, but I think that is also something that we can't ever be complacent about. We have to continue to do outreach. We have to continue to encourage people to make complaints, to make sure as much as we can, people know we exist. People know what we do and how we do it. People know that there are 5 residents who are reviewing these complaints, reviewing the investigations and making determinations. And that it's not just police officers looking at themselves and going, yeah, nothing to see here, move along. So.
Thank you. This has been an absolutely, as I knew it was going to be, an outstanding conversation, and the hour and 15 minutes went by way too quickly. I want to thank both of you, Stephanie, Brian, our ASL interpreters, for being here with us tonight. I'm sure that there is so much more that we can talk about, and I hope that you'll entertain us and hopefully join us again for another panel conversation. Thank you for an informative session this evening. For our constituents, thank you for attending and for your questions. To continue this conversation and learn more about civilian oversight and what is happening with the city of Somerville, including past webinar recordings and information about the Civilian Oversight Task Force, please visit the Civilian Oversight micropage. We have put the link on the slide and in the chat for your convenience. Again, a very special thank you and heartfelt appreciation to Stephanie and Brian, who with their very busy schedules have joined us here this evening and have engaged us in a very informative and wisdom-filled conversation. We hope that everyone has been able to learn more about the different ways in which civilian oversight boards function in our neighboring cities. We have placed the links for the City of Boston's Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, as well as the City of Cambridge's Police Review and Advisory Board websites in the chat if you would like to learn more about them. We invite you to follow the Department of Racial and Social Justice on Facebook, www.facebook.com/somerville.rsj, and on Twitter at Somerville_RSJ. Thank you, everyone. My name is Denise Molina Capers, and I am the Director of the Racial and Social Justice Department for the City of Somerville. Brian and Stephanie, we appreciate you, as well as Elizabeth and Samara for the ASL interpretation. Have a good evening, everyone.